Alright, hello. Don't know if anyone's watching, but I am streaming. This is going out there live on Twitch. Welcome to ENGL 451B, Reading Literature with Computers. So today, this may be my last stream for this class, at least this semester. I mean, obviously, this semester, but the thing I'm thinking is that these streams have been useful to kind of one or two people at a time, and maybe that's not the best use of a stream. Stream is something that should be benefiting as many people as possible, you know. So I've asked for and gotten a few requests for topics, and I've covered those, I hope, in these streams and created code that you can use in notebooks. So that's been useful, but I also can do that without streaming. Like I can do that just in a one-on-one conversation and then maybe work through your actual problems a little bit more in more detail, like with your actual data, for example. So that's something that perhaps I'd like to shift to doing more of. So let me see if anyone's online yet. One viewer, hello, whoever you are. So I'll sort of babble on generically for a minute and then introduce today's session a little bit more. A little bit more formally. So it's a beautiful spring day, you know, nice and sunny, a little bit chilly, but not bad really in the sun. It's very nice in the sun. Took a walk earlier. Oh, excuse me. I always like to take a walk between classes, so I'm probably going to do that after this class too. So hopefully you all can hear me okay. Oh, I just noticed I misspelled the title of the stream. Let me edit that slightly. So it's ENGL 451B, not 45B. So there we are. Okay, so this is Twitch. I don't know. Alright, so we got OBS is running okay, audio looks good, so hopefully you can hear it if there's anyone out there. And a few people are online on Discord, or Shannon is anyway. Oh yeah, Connor is not. Yes. Connor just asked if we were going to, if I was going to record it, and yes, indeed, I am, Connor. So, and Connor, I've been meaning we should touch base. We should talk about your project. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with this, and then this will just be obviously an archive if no one's or very few people are watching live, which is fine. So the thing I was thinking, as I said earlier, was that many of you are at the point in your projects where you're trying to figure things out, put it together, get it working. I'm certainly happy to help you I'm certainly happy to continue helping you get it working and writing the code even. So I just need to understand what you're trying to do and then help you figure out if it's possible and then help you kind of work through something that'll work. So I think maybe you're still at that phase, but all of you need to start finishing that phase soon. Like you need to get to the point where you've got your code and your models and you're trying to understand how to interpret them. And that interpretation or explanation, that's the project. Like that's the essay that you're going to be completing. And we have about a week and a half of class left, and then it's finals week. I do air quotes because schedules are sort of meaningless now, but we are running short on time, and so you need to get to the point where you're writing very soon. So I thought I would spend some time today talking about how to set that up and start writing that, and to think about this, to kind of envision this. I would draw your attention to, or encourage you to recall, when we looked at case studies, thousands of years ago, back when we were meeting face to face. And we looked at a lot, especially from this journal on cultural analytics. And conceptually, a lot of these are going to be doing something pretty similar to what I think you will do. I looked at this one here already just a few minutes ago. This one just was published a few days ago. I guess they do a rolling publication. And this is Heather Froelich, who's published this article about dramatic structure and social status in Shakespeare's plays. And so I took a look at it, and I'm going to see if I need to switch my OBS window here. Let me just do this. So I can switch to, there we go. goes here, but let me try again. There it is. Okay, so let me, sorry, I'm just adjusting the way that it shows up on the stream to make it look more like what I'm seeing. So it's a little, it's kind of a strange border there, but that's good enough. Okay, so this is the article, this is a PDF, and you know, one thing obviously that's different with yours is that you're going to be making something that lives on the web and is not a PDF. I think this PDF structure is a real drawback actually to this journal, but we can certainly do things on the web, and it's in fact easier. So let's take a look at how this is organized. You remember a while ago you wrote an abstract, so here's Heather Froelish's abstract, and then there's kind of this introduction section, and now we have some subheadings. I think subheadings are great. You're going to be creating a long, pretty complex document, so I think subheadings are very important for this. So I think looking at this one is going to help us see how subheadings can be useful. So we could, like if this was a web document or a Google Notebook, we could just view the subheadings as an outline, but it's a PDF, so we can't. So we have to actually scroll. But if we look at it here, there's this opening section with no subheading, and then we have dramatic structure. This is an explanation of dramatic structure and using Freitag's model. Here's social class in early modern England. So here's our next subheading. So explaining the two ideas, identifying Cordy's titles. Now we're getting into methodology. This is where she's saying, here's how I did this. And she's not offering a lot of code, but giving us explanations of how she used different computing processes to extract the information. Now you notice this is a much longer section, but she's getting into it in pretty good detail here as far as how this works. And then, again, dramatic, this is again methodology. So the previous one was identifying courteous titles, and now we're on to applying models of dramatic structure to early modern drama. So now we're really putting it together into methodology. So she's using a tool called AntConc. We haven't actually, I don't think I've introduced this tool at any point, but it's one of several tools, and you can see here it makes a concordance kind of view and what it calls a concordance plot. So if there's a mention of this particular string, then it shows you like a vertical bar for where it occurs within it. So you can get kind of a barcode view of it. It kind of looks like DNA. So, you know, it's a pretty good way to get a glimpse at something. And interestingly, she's done something to combine these images using a method that I would have done probably in ImageJ using a Z-project. But pretty cool how this creates kind of a meta picture. It took me a while of looking at this to understand what this is, but this is like a meta concordance plot, I think, for 36 plays, which is pretty cool. So that way we can get a sense of distribution as a general rule for Shakespeare's plays. It's an abstraction, in other words. A little hard to follow, actually, but I think it's fine. And in any case, what we're seeing is this is kind of what she's been building up to. That there is this, after understanding dramatic structure, after understanding social status, after understanding how she interpreted both of those in several texts, finally we see this graph, this image that tells us something interesting about the way that social status and dramatic structure are linked. And then this final section here is explaining that image and then drawing conclusions. So she's interpreting the image and interpreting the results and then drawing conclusions from that. And again, the conclusion section is relatively short. So I recommend a similar outline to yours where you have some kind of introduction, like a high-level overview, introduce the context, get into methodology, interpret your results, and then draw some conclusions. And I'll show you how that might look in a Google Colab notebook or a similar kind of structure. So I like this structure. It's very straightforward, actually not very, tricky or complex or performative. Like some of the essays we read were definitely kind of performative, but that one I think is very straightforward, and it's what I recommend you doing as well. So let's do, why don't I have, where's my Google Colab? Okay, that's weird, but I can make one from here probably. I remember somebody else was having this problem where their Colab didn't show up. So let me see if I can find it. Yes, it is installed. Launch. No. I don't want to make an app script. Those are. Well, I mean, I have all these here. I could just make a copy of one of these, but that's kind of annoying. Okay, well, let's take this one called Untitled. I don't know what it is. I'm going to just assume that you can figure out how to, get a Colab notebook open, and you have one. If nothing else, I guess I can make one through this weird way and then share it with you. I don't remember what this was, so I'm going to just, nope. Just go here, File, New Notebook. Yeah, I don't know why I had to go through that. I don't know why the shortcut didn't show up, but yeah, there's my TDIFDF vector thing. Okay, so I'm gonna call this something. So I'm going to try to build this with as much specificity as I can, but I really don't have a project like you all do, so I'm just going to work with my Chesterton stuff. It's not a very interesting hypothesis. What I have is certainly not as interesting as what you all are working on, so you have to kind of bear with me on that, but hopefully you'll see what you can do in terms of structure that would be useful. Okay, so we first started off with a text cell, and remember the headings are indicated by the number of pound signs that you put in front of some text. So I'm going to say GK, I need to come up with some kind of title. So think of this like a title. So this is parallel to dramatic structure and social status in Shakespeare's plays. Something about GK Chesterton. I mean, I don't know. Stylometric distributions of genre. I mean, one notable thing about Chesterton is that he wrote in a lot of different genres, which is not always the case for most authors. So that's something that's interesting about him, and it would be interesting, therefore, to apply stylometric analysis to see how those different genres appear within the corpus. So if you recall the example I put together on Monday, that graph, perhaps I could color code those different works by their genre. Like, that might be interesting. So you all wrote an abstract. I would recommend literally just start off with your abstract, and that's your introduction, right? I mean, that's something that introduces the overarching concerns of your project and the overall ideas. It's probably evolved since you wrote that abstract, so definitely write the evolved version of it here, but write that here, expand it if necessary. I'm just doing this, I'm just writing this in square brackets because I don't have an abstract or any text really for this argument. But just something like that, right? So just a general introduction. You don't need to write introduction as a subheading because that's implied, because you're already writing this opening section here. So I will just assume that you understand that that's write a couple paragraphs, 2 or 3 paragraphs maybe. Whatever you need just to lay out the basic shape of this study, the basic argument that you're making. And really a lot of your abstracts that you wrote were great for that. So I would say start with those, expand and update them as you feel you need to. Okay, the next section then I would say this should be a background section. You don't need to call it background, but you could call it something like, in my case, let's say Chesterton and genre, right? So I would like to probably summarize and explain the different genres that Chesterton worked in. So Chesterton was a prolific writer who worked in many genres. I mean, I would write something more artful than that, but perhaps talk about some of the genres that he was most well known for, talk about some of the other writers in those genres, talk about some of the genres that were emerging as he was writing, like the whole idea of like detective fiction and mystery fiction. Oh, you're right. Sorry, Shannon. I need to switch back to the trying to get fancy with Windows, and I made a mistake. So here we are. Why is that twice? Okay, well that's better. Okay, sorry about that. So here we are. This is what I was creating. It's a Google notebook. You haven't missed much, honestly. So it's just the The title here is indicated with a single hash there. That's the thing I wanted to make sure to show you, that it's marked down. So we're writing this with the single hash mark for the heading, and then write your abstract expanded and updated here. And then for Chesterton and genre, this is the background section, and so I'm writing that with 2. You might add multiple ones, like we just looked at in the Heather Furlish article of the PDF, the heading on plot structure and then the heading on class structure. Like those are 2 different kinds of backgrounds, and her whole argument is to bring those 2 areas together. So that's something that if you have multiple areas, you should bring together. If you have one, you should dig into it a little bit to provide the context. I would probably, for example, explain a bit more about who G.K. Chesterton was and what he was known for, and get into that a little bit here. And there would be several citations for me to do that. Like, I don't know these things off the top of my head, so I'd have to look them up and then cite those sources and explain those sources. Maybe talk about his significance as a writer and his influence. So there's lots of ways in which I could talk about Chesterton here in a way that's pretty much a straightforward kind of literary literature review, but also some analysis that's familiar from any other English class you may have taken. If there's a particular scholar who works a lot with Chesterton, I would probably try to figure out who that is and cite them as an authority on Chesterton. But as I write, I recommend doing parenthetical citations, by the way, because footnotes are going to get tricky in this notebook environment. So if I wanted to cite Freitag, then I would do 50. I'm just guessing, obviously. But you would go in and write this in maybe multiple paragraphs, and you might find it easier to write in a different environment than this. Honestly, like this is not really set up to be a document editor. It's just meant to let you write little blurbs pretty quickly. But in your case, you might have a couple paragraphs, and so you should write those in a place you feel comfortable with. But as you copy them in, make sure that you copy in styling. You might have to update it. So remember, as I'm writing here, remember, titles should be displayed in italics. So set those off with underscores. So that's, let's see, yeah. So for example, if I want to discuss Chesterton's The Man Who Was Thursday, it should always be in italics. So, oops, why did I get to? Oh, I think because it just took this one as the big. It's like this one as the first one, and then it ended here. I wonder if I can make that. Okay, that works. I had to unescape that. I had to escape that so that it would not render that as markdown. It would actually just show that as a literal underscore. Anyway, so that's what you got to do. Make sure that they're showing up right. And you do have to do a little bit of extra sometimes within these things, but ultimately you don't have very many options at all. It's meant to be a very simplified kind of text environment. Which, by the way, if you are interested in doing this in some other environment, like a WordPress page or like static HTML, where you can have a lot of different options, that is fine as well. I'm just giving you this version because I think this is what most of you will want to do. But if you wanted to do it some other way, also acceptable. So just be clear about that. These are the kinds of things that we can talk about once we have a conversation about your project. Okay, so any additional background would probably be helpful here. I think in my sort of hypothetical project here, so I would say stylometrics and TF-IDF, since that's the kind of stylometric I'm doing here. I would find some sources about this methodology. So if you look at Programming Historian, there might be something there. You could cite the Programming Historian lesson as an example about it, but let's see. Where's their TF-IDF? So when you look at this, it talks a bit about how the algorithm works and who developed it, and that's the kind of thing that you could cite as well. So you could cite both this article on Programming Historian, and you could also cite anything that they are citing. Like they could also be potential sources for you to help explain TF-IDF. Keep in mind your audience for this. Like I am obviously like, yeah, look at all these sources. So this is, like, I'm the primary audience, obviously, but you should write this for a general audience as well. So don't assume when you're writing this that you can just say TF-IDF and that's good enough. You need to explain what TF-IDF is. And if you're still not sure what it is, I would recommend, read these programming historian things carefully. There's a good Wikipedia article on TF-IDF. It's also mentioned in Steve Ramsey's book. So as a model, there are ways to understand it and explain it, and that's what you should do. You should definitely do that work to explain your methodology here in your kind of overview section. Okay, I'm going to say background on history of TF-IDF and explanation of how it works for a general reader. So now that we've got two different backgrounds here, and you might have more, but for my project, my hypothetical project, I at least need these two background sections. Now let's think about getting into methodology. So this is where, let's do another text cell. Methodology. So here's where you should describe the corpus you're using, like how many documents, where you got them from, and what you did, whatever you did to prepare them. What documents, where I got them from, how I prepared them. So you might even want to make a subheading here. You can do that with a three hash marks to make a third level heading. I don't know. I mean, whatever. This is just different kinds of parts of the methodology that are significant, and so they might be worth explaining separately. But in any case, you should now explain exactly what you did. So this is the background of the idea, and then this is the thing that I did, the actual work I did. So we're getting close to the actual point of using code. So this is the point where, again, we're taking a while to get there, and that's okay in this kind of writing. Like, this is, just how it works. The next step then would be some we'll call it examples or results or data. Let's see, let's call it, come on, give me that pop-up. We'll call it data, I don't know, that's good enough. Maybe a better, well, maybe result, no, not result. No, we'll call it data, okay, sorry to keep wavering. So the cells below contain the code that will demonstrate whatever. Like, you actually explain what they're going to demonstrate, but hopefully you get the idea here. But let me think of a more specific way to say that. Will be run contain Python code. Remember, we're explaining this, so someone who has never seen this kind of thing before. So we want to make sure to be, as specific as possible. We'll analyze my selected corpus for TF-IDF frequency weights of around 200,000 key terms, including stop words. I would say this a bit more elegantly and explain stop words, but I've already done that before, so that's hopefully, I might do that up here in this essay project that I'm building. But then, let me keep going with this for now. Then, those values are decomposed with a PCA matrix so they can be represented as X and Y on a scatter plot. I mean, this again, I would explain a bit more about what a PCA matrix is. You might even do this explanation of the graphing part after doing the analysis part. But here's where I can actually start putting some code in. And again, remember, your goal is to explain it, so make sure that it makes sense to someone else. So let me find the notebook I started the other day. Not that one, it was this one, yep. Now this notebook that I did the other day, this was mainly for, I guess, Allison's project. But looking at it, I see your question, Alyssa. Let me finish my thought here, and then I'll get back to that. So this was really kind of explaining the method and then giving you this. If you wanted to actually run this in the context of a project, I think it might be easier to combine a lot of these things. So I'll show you why. So here's how this might look in this example. So importing. So I think in this case it might be better to write these code comments as code comments to explain the code in the context of it. So this is the importing some modules and libraries. I like to make that one cell, but Python Notebook didn't like that. Remember, I had to import a whole lot of things for this one, it turned out. So then I'm going to build the data. And notice I want to actually keep adding this to the same cell, so it keeps it all together. This is going to not run because I need to mount my drive, I think. Yeah, well, it ran, but it probably didn't find anything, so I need to mount my drive. Okay, so this is running that vectorizer algorithm on it. Again, I'm not running this all until I'm really, sure that I don't need it. In other words, I want to make sure this works, but I want to try to run this all as a single cell if possible. So I'm just taking the things that I ran separately as different cells as I was figuring it out, and I'm going to put these all into one cell, and hopefully this will all work, right? I always say hopefully. So there's quite a bit going on in here, so it's going to take it a minute to run. Well, so while it's running, you notice this is kind of explaining the code for someone who's interested, but the main ideas of the essay are really going to be in your explanation, so in your text cells. So this is really kind of here for that reader who wants to dig into your code, and it's right here. So you can actually hide your text and code cells so that they aren't, like, you can collapse them and hide them. And you might want to do that. But don't do like expository kind of writing in code comments. Just kind of explain what different code pieces are doing or different lines are doing. That's all like I'm doing here. Like I'm not explaining my methodology, really I'm explaining just my programming. And there's a difference there that I want you to be aware of. So yeah, that's going to run for a bit. While that's running, so Alyssa asked about, can we either submit our notebooks or upload onto our blogs and submit? Which one would one way be better for us to do? Yes, you can put it into a blog, but remember, I do want you to have code and data in there. So if you do that in a blog, you have to make sure that you're including code, and there are ways to do that. You can't usually run code inside of WordPress, but you should show me your code in the essay or in the project. You should also show me your graphs and your data. So I kind of like working in the Python notebook because you don't have to worry about some of these things. But if you're already comfortable enough working in WordPress, for example, that you would rather just kind of stay in WordPress, what you would probably need to do are two things. And this is kind of, again, these are the things that we would need to look at with your project individually. But the two things you need to do is have, so whenever you display code in a blog post, there are some plugins for WordPress you can get that will display it with syntax highlighting, so it looks nice and it's readable. You can see that the syntax highlighting in my notebook view right here. That just helps me as I'm writing it, but it also helps explain it to someone else. And so I would recommend using one of those plugins to display your code in your project post or page on WordPress. There are a couple that I have a whole bunch installed on my WordPress that I haven't used for a while, and I remember one of them was a lot better than the others, but I can't remember which one it was. So that might take some trial and error, but that's something I would definitely recommend you do. The other thing is to, if you're going to be creating graphs of some sort, make them live graphs if possible, as opposed to just images of graphs. So there is, I mentioned it before, but I really like HighCharts. It's a library, it's a JavaScript library for doing charts, and you can embed them into web pages. And there's lots of different ones, and they are nice because they are, well, let's see, let's look at some demos here. A lot of these are interactive, meaning like you can, when you view one, like this is what it looks like. You can hover over different parts of it and it'll highlight with different values. Pretty slick. It gives you code that you could then embed into your web page, and then, you know, this is a bit much if you've never done code before, but if you are, again, okay with working with code, it is certainly possible to embed charts into a blog post. It may take some work to figure it out, though, because that's not usually how people use HighCharts. Usually it's just inside of a static HTML page, and so they give you the code here to include their code base from their CDN. They give you some JavaScript and some CSS. You would have to put your data into this format. I don't know if you can see, but this is, for this particular HighCharts demo with the line graph, that's what their data looks like. So you would have to construct it in a way that matches what that particular thing works with. But once you get it in there, it works pretty nicely. I don't know if you're checking like the coronavirus information on worldometers.info, but they use HighCharts for those graphs. Pretty useful and accessible, so I do recommend that. I think it's a different kind of work, Alyssa, so if you would rather not deal with that kind of presentation side of it, I would just let Google Notebook, the Colab Notebook, handle that. It'll do okay. The graphs that you can make in Matplotlib aren't interactive, but they are in the sense that the code is right here, and so if you want to tweak it and understand it better, you can look at the code directly. So there is a trade-off there. I think you could make a much nicer version of your project on a blog post, but getting there will take a different kind of work, and for some people that might be too much work. It might not be for you. I know you've worked with blog stuff a lot, but other people might decide that that's not what they'd rather spend their time with. So that's the different trade-offs. But this is why I'd really like to talk to you each individually about your plans for it. Okay, so look at all this code. It's a lot, but it worked, right? So that's good. Let's see. I can actually maybe I should organize this a little differently so I can hide this. Like if you make some a text heading just above it, then that should make it possible to collapse. So something like that. This cell. Something like that. So that way then I can just click this button to hide that part if I don't really want it to be the thing that people notice first, which might be reasonable. I mean, it's a lot of code, so that's something that you might realize is a bit too much to show people. Okay, so let's make another section down here, and we'll say, let's see, what level heading was that? Okay, so I might do a bit more to talk about, like, you know, explain what I have now. But the next section probably should be visualizing the TF-IDF data. So this one, I'm going to say, let's see, getting the data, something like that. And then TF-IDF processing there, and then visualizing the TF-IDF data. So I would probably add a bit of background about visualization, scatter plots, etc. Whatever it, whatever you want, but something there to kind of give you a bit more. And then let's do another code cell and say running a visualization. Now we can do the rest of the code from here. Or actually, maybe I should do a section on PCA, right? Because that was a pretty important part of that. So let me do that too. Allison, I meant just in general about scatter plots. That could also be part of the opening section of the article. And Alyssa, I'm not sure I understand your question about evaluations. So you can clarify your question while I'm running this here. I'm going to update this. I'm going to do, instead of this about scatter plots, I'm going to do a section first about using PCA to simplify the data. And so next cell uses to complex n-dimensional data into something. So now let's do what the finally, okay, so here's my PCA code, and then I'll get the rest of this section into one cell as well before I run it. And again, I'm not doing a lot with comments in this. Code comments, you certainly could, but this shouldn't be, they shouldn't be discursive comments. Like, you're not making an argument here, you're just explaining what each line does if you want to. And I don't need to print the final graph there, I'll just do it like that. Okay, so again, this is my running code, so I'm going to run this. This is the part that may take a little bit more time, so let's see. So Alyssa, you were asking about, I don't remember what you're talking about for creative coding. I don't know if you mean like a course evaluation. Those have all been, those are not happening this semester for any class, I believe, or they're going to be radically different than normal. Like if you're talking about the normal sort of evaluate the course thing that exists for any course, that's the thing that is handled through Canvas, and you click on the student evaluation of courses. That's going to be totally different this year, and I don't know when you're going to get information about that, but it's not going to be a big deal. Like, it's not going to be, I mean, it's optional anyway, but it's not something that's going to be that different. It's going to be more about your general experience this semester as opposed to a specific class, I think. But do you mean like a self-evaluation? I wasn't planning to ask for anything other than this project, so I don't want to create a new assignment for you to do, but I am interested in you, I guess, thinking about what you've done, if that makes sense. So, I don't know, maybe if you can clarify your question, I can, or maybe if I didn't answer your question, then maybe try to clarify it. Okay, so let me get actually into the graph, and this will be the, now we have, now the following code will generate a scatter plot of this information. Okay, so now we have this graph, and this is not a huge amount of code, right? I mean, this is something that, if you remember, we went through several different iterations of to change different, like, zoom levels, essentially. And so I'm just copying whatever the final version was here that we ended up with. But this is definitely a case where I could see you printing, displaying different graphs or different sections of it or different versions of it with different labels to highlight different parts of it. And this is where the analyzing part might come in. So you might want to be like down here, let's make a new section. Let's make this as a second level heading called analysis. And this is where you're going to interpret the graph. Like you're going to explain what you think this means. And so here's what I think this all means and why it's significant. And this is where to do this section really well, you've got to be clear about what your data actually shows. You need to make sure what you're demonstrating here is that you understand what your data actually shows and what your process actually resulted in. You also, to really do this well, you should be putting this in the context of other people's findings. So other scholars have written about Chesterton. Does what I've demonstrated here confirm what other people have said, or does it expose some gaps in what they've noticed about it? In other words, have I learned anything from this that helps me update the general understanding of Chesterton's works? And that's really the hard part. I mean, that's really the most potentially valuable thing to do. But depending on how you have, depending on what you find, you may not be able to do that. You may not be able to make a groundbreaking contribution to Chesterton studies. And you shouldn't consider your project a failure if you haven't been able to do that, because I think most people writing this kind of work aren't making groundbreaking discoveries. They're making they're making small discoveries that shift our understanding in little tiny ways. And that's totally fine. So that's, let me wrap this up, and then there's a couple questions I see there. So the next thing after you've analyzed, well, I guess I'll say analysis and interpretation, because really this is the part where you really need to explain it. Then your conclusion. And in the conclusion, this can be a recapitulation of the same things you said in the abstracts, but just kind of say it in past tense now, or say it like, these are the things I have shown. And the conclusion can be fairly brief too. I mean, it just, like the introduction, it just needs to kind of revisit the main points that you've accomplished in this. And then finally, end it with the bibliography section, or works cited, but bibliography really is probably better for this. And within this, just notice that you can do bullet points, so I would recommend doing your citations, each one of those as a bullet item. You will have to look at formatting, because a lot of your citations will probably have a journal title or a book title in them. So again, make sure that you use the styling to make them italic when you do that. Okay, so let's see what we got here. So Shannon is asking, an optional self-evaluation might be helpful. If you think it would be helpful, yeah, certainly. I mean, it's easy for me to make that an option in Canvas. I'm just trying to avoid overwhelming you all with work or making someone think, oh, no, I have to do a self-evaluation. I guess if I make it clear that it's optional, that hopefully won't bother people who are worried about things. I do want to hear how you think things went. And also, a self-evaluation might be an opportunity for you to say, well, I didn't totally succeed, but I think I learned a lot, and here's how I did that. And you could make an argument for a grade, essentially. And that's perfectly fine. I think a lot of you might be a bit more anxious than you need to be about your grade in this class. I think most of you are doing great work, as far as I can tell. So I think you're going to be fine. And like I said, you don't have to discover something groundbreaking about literature to be successful. Most people won't. I mean, most professionals, most professors doing this kind of work aren't making groundbreaking discoveries every time they write something. So don't set yourself up for that. Don't set yourself up like you're a failure if you don't do that. Really, to me, what will indicate the strength of your project is really the analysis and interpretation part. If you can do that competently, I think that will be a very successful project in terms of this class and in terms of a grade for this class. Okay, yes, Alyssa, good question, Alyssa. Let me get to that one. The next one, Allison had a question about using Google Sheets. So let's see what we can do with Google Sheets. That is certainly possible. Let me think about how that would work. There's no way I don't think there's a way to get Google Sheets into a Google Notebook except as an image. So it's kind of an awkward workflow for that. So let's see if I can demonstrate it. Do I have? Let me just make a quick Google sheet, and I don't know if there's a way to get random numbers in here. If I just had a bunch of random numbers, I can do that. I mean, I could just type numbers. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just typing numbers here. So let's make a plot. Let's make a graph out of this. That actually should be enough for Google Charts to make something. It'll look weird probably, but yeah. Okay, so it's a bar graph, right? I don't know. That's not very interesting. Let's try. Let's see what else I can do. Let's do a scatter chart. Sure, why not? Okay, so this is a pretty dumb graph, obviously, but with Google Charts, you can do a couple things. You can download it, and if you download it as a PNG, like this will work. You won't be able to see the viewer unless I switch to my desktop here, but I have this somewhere. Where did it go? Oh yeah. I guess, so the thing with Google Notebooks, the Colab Notebooks, is you can't upload files, like image files into them and have them stay there. So to get an image into it, you have to actually have it hosted on the internet somewhere. You could host it in your Google Drive and then include it from there, I think. I'm not totally sure that will work. But, you know, maybe the easier, I don't know if it's easier, but here's a chart from Google. Let me try it here. The other way I can think to do this, and this is an ugly workaround, but I think it'll work. You can upload it to your own domain, of course, or you can go to Imager.com and post this image that you just downloaded. So that was my chart.png, and now this is going to give me this. Hi, what's up? So this is going to give you a link to this image. Notice how these images work. What are you doing? It gives you a link to the album first, and so you need to get the actual image URL, not the album URL. So notice how many steps there are here, right? So I think that's a JPEG. Okay, great. And then I can copy this URL, and I can go back to my notebook, and then I can, where did I say I was going to put that? I think I was trying to put that in my other one. But here's a Google chart. So you can click the image button and paste the URL that I just got from Imager right there, and there's my chart. So lots of steps, kind of inconvenient. Also, I can't change this chart. I'd have to go through all those steps again to change the chart. So that's where it's not great, but if you'd rather do that than deal with Matplotlib, I suppose that's all right. I mean, it's up to you what you want to spend your time with. So that's your call, I think. Yeah, I mean, Google Charts is pretty intuitive as far as the kinds of things you can make with it, so maybe that is an advantage. Maybe that advantage overrides the other inconveniences of it. Like, you can make all these charts pretty well. There are fewer options, like you can make a lot more types of charts in high charts, but like I showed you earlier, you kind of have to deal with code to do that. And also, I don't think there's any way to get high charts into a Google Colab notebook. That they are their own thing. Unless there's some way to do it iframe in here. I wonder. Probably is not. Let me just try that before I wrap this up. I'm just going to Google this here. So Alyssa had a question about an unrelated class, not a class question, but indeed we did lose some DGST classes that had been previously scheduled for the fall, and we are hoping to offer them more again. I mean, oh wait, this is not answering my question, is it? So Alyssa, as you may know, the university and most universities are experiencing some financial stress right now, and so because of that we had to cancel several sections because of how those sections were funded, and it gets kind of complicated in terms of budgets, but certain avenues of funding are no longer available to pay people to teach certain classes. So we had to cancel some sections this fall. That move was mainly in the anticipation that things are going to get bad financially, but how bad they will get is unknown. So if they turn out to be not as bad financially, if things turn out to be not as bad as we fear financially, then perhaps those funding avenues will return in time for spring classes. But we don't know yet. So that's unfortunately the case. Okay, so there's questions on Discord too. Sorry, let me see. So that is Slack, not Discord. So, quotes from our bibliography. I mean, I want you to refer to other sources, so you should be quoting them. This is Allison's question, quotes from our bibliography. Yes, I mean, right, so in the project, whenever you are providing the background to explain who G.K. Chesterton is, or whoever you're, to explain who J.K. Rowling is, you're going to be citing sources and you should be quoting them. And you should be including them in your bibliography if you've quoted them. Like quoting a source if they say something well, again, in the background sections, that would be a reasonable thing to do, right? And you've got an annotated bibliography with several possibilities there, so that's the intended purpose of that. You've already done a lot of that background reading to figure that out, and then you're able to hopefully use that as needed within here. So you should definitely be citing sources there, possibly in terms of the background, like explaining what TF-IDF is, if you're using TF-IDF, or PCA, explaining what that is. These are different places where you might rely on someone else's explanation, and so you should quote them in the content of your project, and then cite them in the bibliography, list them in the bibliography as a citation. So hopefully that answers your question there. And sorry, I lost track of Discord. I had too many windows here. There seems like there might be another question. The analysis project is, let me take these backwards. So the analysis project is, I'll just type it too. The analysis project is what I'm demoing now. An essay with code. No presentation. Don't do any presentation. Yeah, there's no, I mean, it would be great if you had something to share, but no, we don't have to. In fact, I thought I had already taken that off of, I thought I'd already unpublished that assignment, but I think maybe I was thinking of something else. But no, there's no presentation. There's nowhere to present it. So, I would love for you all to share your work as you complete it, share it with each other, put it in Discord for each other to see, but otherwise, yeah, don't worry about that. So, Allison, hopefully that answers your questions. The other thing I was going to mention, and I mentioned this in the announcement I sent earlier, but I really think at this point with most of your projects, it's the specific situations you're in are varying, and where you are in the process is different. So I think it would be better, instead of me doing live streams, I mean, I'm not ruling that out, but I think it would be really useful for me to talk to each of you one-on-one, take a look at wherever you are right now with your project, and help you figure out what you need to get to the next step, whatever step that is for you. And that's going to be different in a lot of cases. It might mean working with your corpus some more, or it might mean working on some code, or it might mean, working with the rough draft. But I think these could be like hour-long conversations. Like these could be, we could really dig into things for an hour or so. So that I've set up a new appointment type on my website. If you go to zachweiland.net/contact, you can reserve an appointment that's an hour long for an ENGL 451B consultation. So that's you all. So please schedule that as soon as you can. You don't need to be done before you schedule that. You don't, whatever. Like just whenever the next available time is that you can do, then schedule that time and we can have that conversation. We can do a video chat if you want, or just a text chat. But I think a place for a conversation would work a lot better than emails. So we can go back and forth and kind of figure things out. And you can share your work so far, and I can give you feedback on that and so on. So please do that as soon as you can, and we will probably do that. And I may spend, instead of spending time on these streams, I can spend time on those conversations, and that might be better for more people. So that is about all I had for today. It looked like Shannon was typing something, so perhaps I'll let Shannon finish her thought there. What am I looking at here? I don't remember. I must have done this in class at some point. Maybe this was for a different class. Yeah, too many things. Okay. Yeah. So whichever format you like. I mean, if you want to do it, I mean, you could. I mean, we could do Zoom or something like that, where you could join and you don't have to do a video. Like you can just listen to me, and that would work too. So. Yeah, if you want me to share this, I certainly can. Let me do that now so I don't forget. This is interesting, like seeing like conversations in multiple places, but it's hard to keep up with, but it's all right. Here's the notebook I worked on today, and let me make sure it's shared. Let me give you the right URL for it. Okay, so I think that's the shared URL. So yeah, check that out. Hopefully it's helpful, but it's mainly, it's an outline. So if you want to look at it in that view, this kind of shows you the kind of high level view. And this is the main thing I was hoping to show you actually. So I've got a title, I've got some background stuff, I've got my methodology stuff, and then my analysis, interpretation, and conclusion. So yeah, that's a kind of a snapshot of the overview, a snapshot of the outline. Right. Okay, so Allison has another question. How long is the min-max on this paper? I'm not going to set a limit, but it needs to be long enough, right? So I think, yeah, don't worry about meeting some arbitrary threshold of length and also don't worry about being too long. I think for your particular question, like your particular abstract, Allison, I think you'll need to do some explaining and interpreting. So I can imagine this being a fairly robust kind of paper, but really just do whatever you need to. Think of your audience and be as clear as possible and be as complete as possible. So I'm not going to say it, but if you think of it like, I know that answer doesn't help. I know that can stress people out too. So let me say it this way too. Like in a typical seminar, so an English seminar for this, sometimes people will assign like a 15-page paper as kind of your kind of ballpark seminar paper length. I think this could certainly be less writing because you also have code and you have data in it as well. So in terms of the actual text you write, I can think of it being certainly, I could certainly see you doing enough explanation with fewer than 15 pages, maybe more around like 8 pages worth of writing, something like that. Of course, this isn't paginated like in the Google Colab notebook, so it's not really going to be measured that way, and I'm not going to try to measure it that way. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to answer, in other words. There's also not a word count tool in here, so I'm not going to try to do that if you're turning it in a Colab notebook. But it should be long enough to explain itself well. I mean, if you give it a judicious explanation of the background, you give a thorough explanation of your methodology and a reasonable, competent analysis of it, like that's going to be a fair amount of writing, and that's what you should hope for those is that it's complete, right? That's okay. Yeah, I don't mind answering questions. I'm glad to hear them. I'd rather you ask than wonder and not know. Okay, so I've been going on for a bit, so I'm going to wrap this up. I don't know. Who knows what the future holds, but this may be my last one of Twitch for this class. Maybe not. Maybe I'll just... I think it might be fun to do, like after I have a few projects turned in, it might be fun to have like a overview talking about different people's projects once they're done. Or just kind of a general wrapping things up kind of stream, although I'd prefer that to be a conversation as opposed to a stream, so maybe we can do that in Zoom. Okay, great. Well, thanks for watching. If you have more questions, of course, reach out and let me know, and go ahead and schedule your consultation whenever you can. Okay, have a good afternoon.